It came on a Monday morning. That envelope. A heavy, cream-colored thing. The kind you'd expect for a wedding invitation or some grand announcement. I was sitting at my kitchen table. The one I'd bought secondhand when I moved into this little apartment in the Chicago suburbs. The morning light filtered through my old lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the worn wooden floor. I held the envelope in my hands, feeling its weight, its smooth texture. My name was written across the front in Lucas's precise, angular handwriting. Patricia Coleman. Not Mom, not Mother, just Patricia. Like I was some distant acquaintance he barely remembered. I should have known better than to hope. At 64, you'd think I'd have learned by now. But there I was, tracing my fingers over his handwriting, letting myself believe for one fleeting moment that this might be something good. A letter, maybe, a note to say he missed me, that he wanted to see me. Lucas, my only son, hadn't called in months. The last time we spoke, his voice was clipped, rushed, like he was doing me a favor by picking up the phone. I set my tea down, the mug warm against my palms, and carefully slid my finger under the flap. Inside wasn't an invitation, not to his engagement party, not to anything. It was an invoice, crisp, professional, printed on thick paper that screamed money. $30 for an engagement party at the Drake Hotel. Another $30 for a Maldives honeymoon. Total due, $60. Payment expected within 30 days. And at the bottom, in Lucas's handwriting, a note that cut deeper than any knife. You should feel honored to contribute to this milestone. After all the trouble you've caused our family. I read it again, and then a third time. The words blurred, but their meaning sank in like a stone in my chest. My son, the boy I'd raised alone after Edward died, was charging me for a party I wasn't invited to, a trip I'd never even heard about, and he thought I should be grateful for it. The tea mug slipped from my hands, hitting the floor with a dull crack. Shards scattered across the wood, and the dark liquid spread out, pooling like a wound. I didn't move, I just stared at it, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in a way it hadn't since the day I buried my husband. I'm not sure how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe, or an hour. This apartment, this small, tidy space I'd made my own after Edward's death, felt smaller than ever. 7 years ago, I'd left our old house, the one filled with memories of Lucas's childhood, his crayons on the kitchen table, his laughter in the backyard. I'd been a librarian then, spending my days helping kids find stories to love. Now, retired on a modest pension, I lived quietly, carefully, in a world I'd built from the pieces of a life that had fallen apart. And yet, here was my son, treating me like a line item on his budget. I thought about the last time I saw Lucas. It was a year ago, at a fancy coffee shop downtown. He'd invited me to meet his fiancée, Sophia, but the whole thing felt like an obligation. Sophia barely looked at me, her smile tight, her eyes scanning the room like she was waiting for someone more important. Lucas made little jabs, about my coat being vintage, about how I should get out more. I'd laughed it off, like I always did, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We swallow the hurt to keep the peace. But now, sitting here with that invoice in my hands, I realized something. That little boy who used to hug me tight when the thunderstorms rolled in. He was gone, and in his place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook. The envelope lay on the table, accusing me, mocking me. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I felt something else stirring inside me, something sharp and cold, like the first frost of winter. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. The broken tea mug lay scattered across my kitchen floor, its jagged pieces glinting under the morning light. I didn't bend down to pick them up. Not yet. The invoice from Lucas sat on the table, that crisp, cream-colored paper staring up at me like it had a voice of its own. Taunting me. $60,000. For a party I wasn't invited to. For a honeymoon I'd never even been told about. And that note, those words in my son's handwriting, telling me I should feel honored to pay for it. Honored. The word burned in my chest. Sharp and bitter, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the mess on the floor. My hands trembled, not from sadness but from something else. Something new. Anger. Not the loud, shouting kind I'd never been good at, but a quiet, Cold fury that settled deep in my bones. I was 64 years old. A retired librarian who'd spent her life organizing other people's stories, making sure every book found its place. And yet, here I was, reduced to a line on my son's expense sheet. When had I let that happen? When had I become someone Lucas could treat like this? I thought about the last time I saw him. It was a year ago. At a sleek coffee shop in downtown Chicago. The kind with overpriced lattes and waiters who looked like they belonged in a magazine. Lucas had invited me to meet Sophia, his fiancée, but the whole evening felt like a performance. Sophia barely spoke to me, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. Lucas made small talk, but it was laced with little barbs, comments about my cozy apartment. My simple life. The way I still wore the same sweater I'd had for a decade. You should treat yourself, Patricia, he'd said, his smile sharp. Not Mom, Patricia. I'd laughed it off, like always, because that's what I'd done for years. Smiled through the hurt, kept the peace, but now, with that invoice in front of me, I saw it for what it was. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a resource, a bank account he could tap when it suited him. The realization should have broken me. It didn't. Instead, it felt like a door creaking open inside me, letting in a sliver of light I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't going to pay that bill. I wasn't going to let Lucas treat me like this anymore. I stood up, my knees stiff from sitting too long, and walked to the sink. The shards of the mug crunched under my slippers, but I left them there. They belonged in the mess, just like that invoice did. I caught my reflection in the small mirror by the kitchen door. Gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. Lines around my eyes from years of squinting at library cards and worrying about a son who didn't seem to care. My sweater was faded, my face plain, unremarkable, but my eyes, they were different now. They held something I hadn't seen in a long time. Resolve. I wasn't the woman who'd spent her life making herself smaller so others could feel bigger. Not anymore. I grabbed my old laptop from the living room, the one that took forever to boot up, and sat back at the table. My fingers moved with purpose. Typing, Drake Hotel Chicago events, into the search bar. The screen flickered, but it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Photos of the hotel's grand ballroom, glittering chandeliers, and menus that cost more than my monthly rent. Then I searched for the Maldives resort Lucas had chosen for his honeymoon. Private villas, infinity pools, rates that made my stomach twist. Every click painted a clearer picture of the life my son thought he deserved, and the role he'd assigned me in it. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, using the chipped mug I kept for emergencies. The invoice still lay on the table, but I didn't look at it. Instead, I started making a list. Names, numbers, details, the catering company, the florist, the event planner, all the people Lucas assumed I'd pay without question. I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through me, and felt something I hadn't in years. Control, not over Lucas, not over his choices, but over my own. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to let him dictate the story. I thought about Edward, my husband, who'd always said I was stronger than I knew. He'd been gone 7 years now, and I'd spent most of those years trying to hold onto the family we'd built. But Lucas? He'd moved on, built a life that didn't include me, except when he needed something. And that was going to stop. Right here, right now. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, landing on a name I hadn't called in years. Ellen Ramsey. She'd been Lucas's friend in high school, back when he was still the boy who'd bring me dandelions from the park. Ellen was an event planner now, and if my research was right, she was the one handling Lucas's engagement party. I didn't know what I'd say yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect, and I was done letting my son treat me like I didn't deserve it. The kitchen was still a mess. The broken tea mug scattered across the floor like a map of my fractured hopes. But I didn't care about the mess anymore. That invoice from Lucas, with its cold demand for $60, lay on the table. And I wasn't going to let it define me. Not anymore. At 64, I'd spent too many years tiptoeing around my son's ego, swallowing my hurt to keep the peace. But peace at what cost? My dignity? My self-respect? No, I was done with that. I sat down with my laptop again. the screen casting a faint glow in my quiet apartment. My fingers moved faster now, driven by something I hadn't felt in years, purpose. I dug deeper into the details of Lucas's engagement party at the Drake Hotel. The website boasted photos of crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and menus that cost more than my monthly pension. Then I looked up the Maldives resort. All private villas and turquoise waters. The kind of place I'd only seen in magazines. Every click confirmed what I already suspected. Lucas had planned a life of extravagance. And he'd assumed I'd foot the bill without a word. I sipped my tea, the chipped emergency mug warm in my hands, and made a mental list of who to call. First, Ellen Ramsey. She'd been Lucas's friend in high school, back when he still laughed easily and brought me flowers he'd picked from the neighbor's yard. Ellen was an event planner now, and my research told me she was the one handling Lucas's big night. I found her number in an old address book, buried in a drawer with birthday cards and faded photos. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I say? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew I needed answers. When Ellen answered, her voice was warm, familiar, like a hug through the phone. Pat? Oh my goodness. It's been forever. How are you? I could hear the smile in her words. And for a moment, I felt like the old days, when she and Lucas would sprawl across my living room floor, arguing over board games. I took a deep breath and got to the point. Ellen, I'm calling about Lucas's engagement party. I got an invoice, $60, for a party I wasn't invited to. The line went quiet, then Ellen's voice came back, softer, cautious. Pat, I had no idea you weren't invited. Lucas told me you were thrilled to cover the costs. He said you wanted to make this special for him and Sophia. That you felt bad about, well, not being able to attend because of your health. My health? I almost laughed. My health was fine, just a few aches from years of shelving books in the library. But that was Lucas, spinning stories to get what he wanted. There's more, Ellen said, her tone shifting to something sharper. Lucas signed the contracts for the vendors, the catering, the flowers, the lighting, using your name. He said you'd authorized it, that you'd handle all the payments. I sent the invoice because he told me you'd agreed to everything. My heart stopped. My name? On contracts? A cold knot formed in my stomach. Lucas hadn't just assumed I'd pay, he'd forged my signature, putting me at risk of legal trouble if those bills went unpaid. I thanked Ellen, keeping my voice steady, and promised to call her back. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear. It was fury, pure and clear, like a bell ringing in my chest. I needed more information, someone else who could fill in the gaps. That's when I thought of Judy Marshall. Judy had been my neighbor years ago, back when Lucas was still in school. She worked part-time for a catering company now, and I'd heard through the grapevine that her company was handling Lucas's party. I dialed her number, my fingers steady despite the storm inside me. Judy picked up on the second ring. Pat, is that you? I was just thinking about you the other day. Her warmth was like a lifeline, pulling me back to a time when life felt simpler. I told her about the invoice, about Lucas's note, about the party I wasn't invited to. Her silence was heavy, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with indignation. Pat, I'm so sorry. Lucas has been a nightmare to work with. He's screamed at our staff, changed the menu 3 times at the last minute, and hasn't paid a dime up front. He kept saying his mother, you, would cover everything on the day of the event. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. Lucas hadn't just betrayed me, he'd used my name to bully others, to make promises I'd never agreed to. Judy went on, her voice softer now. The catering bill alone is $15. Pat, if it's not paid by Friday, we can't serve the food. The florist and the lighting crew are saying the same thing. They're ready to pull out. I thanked Judy and hung up, my mind racing. Lucas had built his dream party on a house of cards, and I held the match that could burn it down. But I didn't want to just walk away. I wanted proof of what he'd done. Proof of the consequences. I called Ellen back and asked if she'd be willing to help me. Can you document the party? I asked. From outside, somewhere public, where you won't be trespassing. I want photos, videos, everything. I need to see what happens when his plans fall apart. Ellen didn't hesitate. Pat, I'm in. Lucas and I were friends once. But he cut me off in high school when he decided my family wasn't good enough for his new crowd. I know exactly who he is. I'll help you. She paused, then added, and I can show you how to protect yourself. Apps for recording calls, ways to save texts, emails, anything you might need if this gets messy. I smiled. A real smile, the kind I hadn't felt in months. Ellen wasn't just an ally, she was a reminder of the people who saw me for me. Not for what I could give them. I spent the rest of the evening making notes. Learning from Ellen how to record conversations. How to save documents. The invoice still sat on my table. But it didn't scare me anymore. It was evidence. A piece of the puzzle I was putting together. Lucas thought he could use me. Control me. Without a second thought. He was about to learn that I wasn't the quiet, compliant mother he'd counted on. Not anymore. The days after my calls with Ellen and Judy felt different. Like the air in my apartment had shifted. The invoice still sat on my kitchen table. But it no longer felt like a weight pinning me down. It was a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. And I was ready to step over it. I'd spent years, decades, really, putting Lucas's needs before my own. Convincing myself that's what mothers do. But at 64, with my gray hair and my quiet life, I was done being invisible. Done being used. The phone calls started 3 days after I spoke with Ellen. Not from Lucas, of course, that would have required him to see me as a person. Not an ATM. They came from Sophia, his fiancée, her voice tight and polished. Like she was reading from a script. Patricia, we need to talk about the payment for the engagement party. There's been a misunderstanding. Please call me back. I didn't. Then Lucas's number appeared on my screen, leaving voicemails that grew sharper with each one. Patricia, this is getting out of hand. The vendors are freaking out. You need to fix this. Fix this. As if I was the one who'd created the mess. I let the messages pile up, listening to them in the evenings with a cup of tea. The chipped mug now a strange comfort in my hands. Each one revealed a new layer of panic. A crack in the perfect facade Lucas had built. He was a marketing specialist. After all, used to selling stories, making everything look flawless. But now, his story was unraveling, and I wasn't going to stitch it back together for him. By Friday, the day before the engagement party, my phone was buzzing nonstop. I turned off the ringer and focused on organizing my little apartment. I sorted through old library records, bills, anything that would prove I hadn't agreed to pay for Lucas's extravagance. If he thought he could drag me into his mess, he was about to learn I wasn't the pushover he'd counted on. Ellen called that afternoon, her voice low, urgent. Pat, it's happening. The vendors are pulling out. The caterers, the florist, the lighting crew, they're all demanding payment up front now. And Lucas hasn't paid a cent. They're saying your name is on the contracts. But I told them you didn't authorize anything. They're furious. I froze, the weight of her words hitting me. My name, on contracts. Lucas hadn't just sent me an invoice, he'd forged my signature, tying me to his debts. If those vendors didn't get paid, they could come after me, my pension, my savings, the little life I'd built after Edward's death. For a moment, fear crept in, cold and heavy. But then I remembered Judy's words. Ellen's support. The way they'd seen me when Lucas hadn't. I wasn't alone in this. And I wasn't going to let fear win. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. on Saturday, the day of the party. I looked through the peephole and saw Lucas standing in the hallway. His suit rumpled, his hair a mess. Sophia was behind him, her arms crossed, her face pale. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Patricia, Lucas said, his voice sharp, like he was scolding a child. We need to talk. Now. Good morning, Lucas. Sophia, I said, keeping my tone calm, almost polite. You look upset. Upset? Lucas's voice cracked, and he stepped forward, as if he could push his way in. The engagement party is falling apart. The caterers showed up this morning demanding $15 in cash. Or they're leaving. The florist took back every arrangement. The lighting crew won't even unload their truck. This is your fault. My fault? I raised an eyebrow, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I'm not the one who planned a party I couldn't afford. I'm not the one who put my mother's name on contracts without asking her. Lucas's face went white. Sophia's eyes widened, and she looked at him, her lips parting. What is she talking about? Lucas? She asked, her voice sharp. I stepped back, still holding the door. Didn't he tell you, Sophia? Lucas signed my name on your vendor contracts. He told everyone I'd pay for your party. Your honeymoon. Everything. $60,000. Without ever asking me. Without inviting me. Sophia turned to Lucas, her expression shifting from shock to anger. You said your mother agreed to cover it. You said she wanted to help. Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting between us. I thought you'd want to be part of this. Patricia, I thought you'd feel bad about missing the party. So I made it easier for you. You could contribute without the stress of being there. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised even me. Easier for who, Lucas? For you? For Sophia's family, who you didn't want me embarrassing with my thrift store clothes and my tiny apartment? Or for me, who you didn't even bother to invite? He flinched, but his voice hardened. You're twisting this. You always make everything about you. This is my engagement party. My future. You're ruining it out of spite. Spite? I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. You sent me a $60 bill with a note saying I should feel honored to pay it. You used my name, my reputation, to lock in contracts you had no intention of paying for yourself. And now, when it's falling apart, you're standing here blaming me? Sophia's face crumpled, and she turned away, her hand covering her mouth. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. That silence said everything. I'd raised him, loved him, given him everything I had. And this was what I'd become to him, a means to an end. Patricia, please, he said finally, his voice softer, almost pleading. I know I messed up. The note was poorly worded. But this is my engagement party. Can't we fix this? What if we scale it down? Do something smaller? I'll make sure you're invited this time. I looked at him, at the boy who used to read bedtime stories with me. The man who now saw me as a problem to solve. Lucas, I said quietly, if I wrote you a check right now, what would change? Would you call me just to talk? Would I be welcome at your home for Sunday dinners? Or would I go back to being the mother you keep at arm's length until you need something? He didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence was louder than any words. And it broke something in me, not my heart. But the last thread of hope I'd been clinging to. That's what I thought, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. You've made your choices, Lucas, now you'll live with them. I stepped back and began to close the door. Wait, Sophia said, her voice trembling. What if we postpone everything? Plan something we can afford? I didn't know about the contracts. Patricia, I swear. I looked at her, saw the desperation in her eyes, and felt a flicker of pity. Sophia, this isn't about you. It's about respect. And Lucas needs to learn what that means. I turned to my son. You put my name on those contracts. If the vendors come after me, I have recordings, emails, everything to prove I never agreed to this. You'll face the consequences, not me. I closed the door, the click of the deadbolt loud in the silence. Through the wood, I heard Lucas's voice, low and urgent, arguing with Sophia, then footsteps, fading away. My phone buzzed with a text from Ellen, party's officially cancelled. Vendors are gone, guests are leaving. I got it all on camera. I leaned against the door, my breath steady, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Lucas had tried to use me, but he'd given me something instead, clarity. And I wasn't going to waste it. The door clicked shut behind Lucas and Sophia, the sound echoing in my small apartment like the closing of a chapter. I leaned against it, my breath steady, my heart strangely calm. Outside, the Chicago morning was gray, with a soft drizzle streaking down my kitchen window. I stood there, watching the rain, wondering what Lucas was feeling right now. Was he angry, ashamed, or just scrambling to save face? For the first time in years, I realized I didn't need to know. His feelings weren't my responsibility anymore. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back. It was a text from Ellen Ramsey. Short and to the point, it's over. Vendors packed up and left. Guests are gone. Lucas had a meltdown in the parking lot. I got photos and videos. Just like you asked. You okay? I typed back quickly. I'm more than okay. Thank you, Ellen. And I meant it. For the first time in a long time. I felt like I was standing on solid ground, not tiptoeing around someone else's expectations. I walked to the window, the rain painting delicate patterns on the glass. The engagement party was supposed to start in a few hours, But now, the Drake Hotel's grand ballroom would be empty. No chandeliers glittering, no trays of overpriced appetizers, no toasts to Lucas and Sophia's perfect future. I pictured the chaos, vendors hauling away their equipment, guests milling in confusion, Lucas trying to explain why his carefully curated day had collapsed. Part of me, the mother who'd spent 32 years loving him, felt a pang of guilt. But it was small, fleeting, drowned out by something stronger. Relief. Ellen sent me a few photos later that morning. The parking lot of the Drake, littered with abandoned floral arrangements. A catering van pulling away, its driver shaking his head. Lucas, his face red, gesturing wildly as Sophia stood off to the side, her arms crossed. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. These images weren't about revenge, they were proof. Proof that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're above them. Proof that I'd done the right thing by standing my ground. That afternoon, Judy Marshall called. "Pat, you won't believe what's happening," she said, her voice warm but tinged with excitement. "The catering company is done with Lucas. After the way he treated our staff, yelling, changing orders last minute, promising payments he couldn't make, they're blacklisting him for future events. And you know what? They're talking about doing a small event for you. Free of charge, just to say thanks for standing up to him." I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside. "Judy, tell them I'd love a potluck at the library instead. No need for anything fancy." Judy invited me to a community gathering at the local library that evening. A book club she'd started years ago. I hadn't been in ages. Too caught up in my own grief. My own small world. But I said yes, pulling out my favorite dress. A navy blue one I'd worn to library fundraisers years ago. It was simple, nothing like the glitzy outfits Lucas's crowd favored. But it felt right, like me. The library was warm, filled with familiar faces, people I'd known when Lucas was still a boy. When Edward was still alive. Judy greeted me with a hug. Her eyes bright. "You look like you again, Pat," she said, and I knew what she meant. Not the tired, quiet woman who'd been shrinking herself to fit her son's demands, but the Pat who used to laugh easily, who loved helping kids find the perfect book. We talked, shared stories, passed around plates of homemade cookies. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a mother, not as a widow, not as a checkbook, but as me. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Edward died. I cooked a real dinner. Not a frozen meal or a quick sandwich, but a proper meal: roasted chicken, potatoes, a salad with herbs from the little pot on my windowsill. I set the table with the china Edward and I had received as a wedding gift. The plates we'd saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. As I ate, I thought about all the dinners I'd made for Lucas over the years. Birthday cakes he'd barely thanked me for. Holiday meals where he'd roll his eyes at my old-fashioned recipes. When had I stopped mattering in my own kitchen? When had I let myself become invisible? My phone buzzed again as I cleared the dishes. It was Ellen. "Pat, I got a call from the library board today," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "They heard about what happened with Lucas, and they want to hire me to organize a fundraising event. They mentioned you, said you'd be perfect to help with it. Something about how you always knew how to bring people together." I smiled, my heart swelling. "Tell them I'm in," I said. As I hung up, I walked to my bedroom window. The rain had stopped, and the Chicago skyline glowed faintly under a soft, golden sunset. Somewhere out there, Lucas was dealing with the fallout of his choices. Somewhere else, vendors were learning the importance of contracts. And Sophia was maybe starting to see who she was engaged to. But here, in my small, tidy apartment, I was learning something too. I was learning what it felt like to value myself enough to demand respect. And that's the thing about life, isn't it? Sometimes, the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. But their choices don't define us. We do, every time we choose to stand up, to say no, to walk away from those who see our love as a transaction. We're writing a new story, one where we're the heroes, not the footnotes. I'd spent years thinking my job was to fix Lucas's problems, to smooth over his mistakes. But now I know better. My job is to live my own life, to love myself as fiercely as I'd once loved him. And in that love, I found something I'd almost forgotten: freedom.